Hello and welcome to this new video, which will be the final video in this series where I'm talking about the SACE EAL final exam. And in this video, I will exclusively focus on the last question of the exam, which is pretty much the most difficult question and also the longest question in the exam. It is question 4, and I personally like to call this question as the reading-based writing question. Now, let's read a question prompt from the 2017 EAL exam. Read the following 4 texts about driverless cars and produce an extended written response of approximately 500 words. Your response should develop a point of view regarding the use of driverless cars in the future. Use and reference information, ideas, and opinions from the texts provided. When we take a look at the 2018 exam, you can see that it follows exactly the exact same prompt. It also asks the students to read a bunch of texts, produce an extended written response of approximately 500 words, and the response should take a position about the impact of computer games in the classroom. So we can see that the question design is exactly the same, with the only difference being that each year a different topic is given. The same thing happened in the 2018 Southern Hemisphere exam, 2019 Northern Hemisphere exam, 2019 Southern Hemisphere exam, 2020 Southern Hemisphere, 2021 Northern Hemisphere, 2022 EALE exam, and 2023 EALE exam. They all ask the students to read a bunch of given texts on a certain topic and then produce an extended written response of approximately 500 words, developing a point of view on the topic, use and reference information, ideas, and opinions from the texts provided. Now, going into the future, and I'm recording this video in 2025, there is a possibility that the exam questions will change, that maybe the word count may be different, or maybe you will have a specific type of texts that you need to produce. No one can really foresee the future. I can't tell personally, but my personal guess is probably in 2026, 2027. I don't think that the question will be much different to the one that we see here. The students will always be asked to read a bunch of texts, write an extended written response on a given topic in which they develop a point of view. So now looking at the last, I don't know, like I didn't count 8 or 9 exam prompts, we see that all of them ask the students for 500 words. They ask them to develop a point of view on a topic, and then they all ask students to use and reference information, ideas, opinions from the given texts. So let's first take a look at the word count of this exam. Now, when you take the exam using the Safe Examination Browser, the SEB, there is a counter. Like here, for example, it indicates that this is 500 words. And visually, this is what 500 words looks like. Do you need to write exactly 500 words? No. Some students, they maybe write a little more. Other students can write a little less. But one thing to keep in mind, if you write too little, you will not be able to achieve a high grade in this task. It's not because the examiners just want or said, okay, we said 500, you have to write 500. No, but just keep in mind that the more you write, the more opportunities you have to showcase how good your English is. And if you only write, let's say, 100 or 150 words, from an examiner's perspective, there simply isn't enough content to effectively and accurately evaluate your English level. And you should always keep in mind, not just in EAL, but in any exam, in any subject, the examiners, they have no idea of knowing what you actually know. They only know based on what you write. If you write too little, they can make the assumption that you know too little. If you write a few sentences, They can go with the assumption that you can only write a few sentences, which is why you must make sure that you don't end up writing something so small or so little like 200 or 300 words. Now, my personal recommendation is to, again, something around 500 words. Now, what about if you have the ability to write more? Let's say you can write 900 words. Should you do that? The answer is also no. You should not write more than, I would say, 550 or even 600. Because anything additional, anything more than 600 words, for example, won't really affect your grade in any way. Because 500 words is enough to demonstrate the kind of evidence that the examiners are looking for. And if you write 700 or 800 or 1,000 words, that will not change the evidence of your learning. Nothing will change. You're just repeating the same things that the examiners already knows that you can do. He or she already knows that. So you don't need to keep repeating the same evidence over and over and over and over again. And the reason why it is not recommended to write something silly like 700, 800, 900 words for this exam is because if you do that, you would just be wasting energy and wasting valuable time. So an essay or a written response that is 450 words, but written well, has very, very few weaknesses, is much effective in gaining a higher grade than an essay that's 1,000 words but has 1,000 mistakes. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Yeah, there is a minimum of quantity that you should showcase. So again, if you write as little as 200 words, that's not really enough to achieve an A in this specific question. But again, you don't need to write 700 or 800 words because that is just unnecessary. Okay, now those 500 words are written on a given topic. And if we take a look, for example, at these two exams, so the first one and this one, the topic, now these are real exams that students have done in the past. And in this one, the students were asked to write about desalination plants. And in the second one, the topic was social media and the internet. Now, for most high school students, they are very, very familiar with social media and the internet, whereas a topic like desalination plant, you would find a lot of students who've never ever thought about this before. They've never read anything on desalination plants. They know almost nothing on desalination plants, but that can be a topic. That can be a topic. And I remember in some old exams, students were asked to write about resurrecting extinct animals. That's a topic. Returning or basically artifact restitution, so returning historical artifacts to their countries of origin. This was also a topic. So and one topic is shortening the weekday, the work week, shortening the work week. So instead like a 5 days work week, that we go to a 4 days work week. So some of these topics, like you have a lot of students who tell me, teacher, like I've never even thought this was a thing. Like I've never thought about this, I've never read anything about this, what should I do? And the thing is, what you have to keep in mind is this is an English exam. This is not a social studies exam, this is not an engineering exam, this is not a science exam, this is an English exam. So from the perspective of an examiner, you will not be evaluated based on the quality and the accuracy of your knowledge on the topic. Absolutely not. You will be evaluated based on how well you write in English. That is what the evaluation is on. It's not on whether you're an expert on desalination plants or not. So if the topic is familiar, it doesn't matter. If the topic is unfamiliar, it still doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters in this examination is your English level. specifically your English writing abilities, your English reading abilities, and both critical writing and critical reading at the same time. So when you sit to take your exams for EAL, if the topic is familiar, don't be happy. If the topic is unfamiliar, don't be sad either, because this is completely irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant, the only thing that matters is your English and nothing else. So, continuing with topics as well, in some previous exams, we had some topics that have very clear sides. Clear sides in a way that either some people agree with this or some people disagree with that. So for example, in a previous exam, the topic was traveling to Mars, like a human mission or humans traveling to Mars. And when we read the given texts, one text was 100% for, another text was 100% against, and the third text was sort of balanced. And this is something that we have sometimes in some years, topics with very, very clear sides. And we also had exams where the topics were a bit more nuanced. So we had nuanced opinions. So for example, in this one here, the topic was solar energy. Now, you will not find anyone who disagrees with solar energy. You will not find anyone who says, oh, solar energy is bad. No one says that. But what we had is all authors, all texts, they agreed that solar energy is beneficial. But each one of them either agreed for a different reason, or they agreed within a specific, or they discussed the topic within a specific context. So when it comes to nuanced opinions or nuanced essays, keep in mind that the context is everything. When we say context, we say the time, when is the time frame that we are treating the topic on, and also the place, the location where. So is it developing versus undeveloping countries? Is it, for example, isolated areas where people live, like, let's say, very far away from big cities? Or are we talking about downtowns with high-rise buildings? So these different contexts are the ones that make the difference between when discussing nuanced opinion essays or nuanced opinion topics. One thing that's repeated in every single exam since 2017 is this one here, that the extended written response must be developing a point of view. Must be developing a point of view. Now here we should ask a question is why they use the word develop, why they don't say have a point of view. What's the difference between to develop a point of view and to have a point of view? So to have a point of view is to simply express your personal thoughts on the topic. To say, I agree, I disagree. That, yep, this topic is blah, 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 blah. I think it's something, 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 or I strongly believe that it is or it isn't. That is simply having a point of view. But when it comes to developing a point of view, it is to take a stance that is constructed based on logical analysis of ideas, information, and opinions found in the given texts alongside your own reflections. So there is a huge difference between having a point of view and developing a point of view. And in this exam, the examiner specifically asks you to develop a point of view and not just have one. So you have to keep in mind that the examiners are not expecting you to be an expert on the topic, but you are expected to show evidence of analysis and evaluation. When you read the given texts, you should be able to take a side, and that decision, which side you will take, should not be constructed haphazardly. It should be based on clear, logical evidence that you find in the texts themselves. All right, now when it comes to using and referencing information, ideas, opinions from the given texts, we have both to use and to reference at the same time. And when the examiners say use, what does use mean? Use can mean one of three things. You either summarize, or you synthesize, or you paraphrase. And when we summarize, synthesize, and paraphrase, we provide evidence of communication, evidence of comprehension, and also evidence of analysis. When the examiners see this evidence, then it is justifiable for them to give you a high grade. And when it comes to referencing, then you have to use either parenthetical citations or narrative citation, or citation, a secondary source, or an indirect citation. So, because again, since we need to use information from different texts, that information has to be cited. But when it comes to direct quotes, do we use direct quotes in this exam? The answer is you can, but you really shouldn't. You shouldn't use direct quotes, or at least you shouldn't use a lot of direct quotes, because when using direct quotes, because again, this is an English exam, when the examiners see a direct quote, the examiner knows that you didn't write that quote, which means you cannot be given evidence of communication and evidence of analysis on that quote. You may be given some evidence of comprehension, because selecting the right quote and putting it in the right place, that does indicate some level of comprehension, but at the same time, writing your own sentences, summarizing, synthesizing, paraphrasing is worth much more than directly quoting, which is why it's not really recommended to use a lot of direct quotes in this question. Okay, so let's now talk about the reading part in reading-based writing. And before this one, let me just tell you why I like... Now, this name, the reading-based writing question, this is not a name that you will find on the SACE website. This is just something I call this question. I personally call this question reading-based writing, and I'm sure most teachers probably don't do that. Maybe they have a better name for it, I don't know. But I call it reading-based writing because in this exam, this is not really a writing question. We will see why later on, but this is not just simply writing. This is not like TOEFL or IELTS where you're given a question prompt and you have to write something on it. No. And this is not reading either. This is not like the kind of reading you would find in an IELTS exam or a TOEFL exam. But this is a combination between both. This question evaluates both your reading abilities and your writing abilities. And when you write, you are writing based on what you have read, not based on what you already know. This is why I call it the reading-based writing questions. So when it comes to the reading, throughout the years, you can be expecting quite a variety of text types. So sometimes you can be given a transcript of a presentation or a transcript of a podcast, radio show, TV interview, and the transcript is given to us in this way. You can also be given news or magazine articles. You can be given quantitative surveys, infographics, qualitative surveys, and so on. So we have a lot of different types of texts that can be given to students for this exam. And in every exam, some texts sometimes can be one-sided and some of them can be balanced. And in some exams, you are given 3 texts. Some exams they have given 4 texts. I believe in one past exam the number was as high as 5 different texts, but the number doesn't really matter because the word count of the reading materials is always approximately 1,500 words. So if you're only given 3 texts, they will be longer than if you're given 4 or 5 texts. The word count is always the same. One additional thing to say about the reading passages is they have more evidence than what you actually need. Therefore, you don't need to include everything in them. So no student should go to the exam with the expectation that I have to summarize everything, I have to paraphrase everything. That's not necessary. You only need to write 500 words. You have 1,500 words worth of evidence. So basically you can write 3 essays out Theoretically, you can write 3 different extended responses from the reading materials that you have at hand. So, and again, no one is expecting you to thoroughly summarize everything. That's not. So in the same way you don't need to include everything, you should also not limit your response to one text only. That is possible, it can be done, but the examiners will not award a high grade if they see that your entire essay is constructed on one text only. So we don't want to limit ourselves to evidence from one text only. So what does the examiner want to see for this exam? And both of these documents are publicly available on the SACE website. The first one that you see on the left, this is the exam essay marking guide. And you can find this one on the SACE website. You can just go to the search box on SACE, type in exam essay marking guide, and you will find this one. And the second one here you see on the right, these are the performance standards for stage 2 EAL, and you can also find them on the SACE website. They are found on the subject outline for EAL. And this is how examiners decide what grade they will award to your essay or your text, your written response. So again, same communication, comprehension, analysis, and application. Being a stage 2 student, you're probably very familiar with these performance criteria because you probably have already done many assessments in the past. So when it comes to communication, this is what the examiners want. They basically want to see, is the writing clear? Does it make sense? And is it easy to understand? Is it ordered coherently in a logical order with appropriate paragraphing and structures? If the answer is yes, and that is done in a sophisticated, high-level way, then this will be an A+. If the answer is no, then obviously the grade will be lower, less and less and less. Second thing when it comes to communication is the writing grammatically accurate, consistent tense, appropriate punctuation, etc. So when it comes to C1 and C2, this is exactly how the examiners will be evaluating your work. And if you want to have, and I really hope that you do, a high grade for this assessment task, then this is what you need to do. Because this is what the examiners are looking for, and you have to give them what they are looking for. When it comes to comprehension, this part of the exam only evaluates CP1, and the examiners will be asking 2 questions when they look at your sample. They will ask, does the student demonstrate that they have understood what they have read in the texts provided? The second question, does the student select appropriate information from the texts to support the development of their piece of writing by evaluating the relevance and appropriateness of the information? When it comes to the analysis, the examiners will be asking whether the student analyzed and evaluated the perspectives in the texts throughout their writing response. And when it comes to application, examiners will be asking, does the student use an appropriate form or structure for the essay, persuasive piece, or a report? So in the exam prompts for the last, I don't know, like 8-9 years, the examiners never asked to produce a specific text type. They never said you have to write an essay or you have to write a persuasive piece. They always said you have to write an extended written response of approximately 500 words. And the students, they can decide what text type they can produce. Most students go for essays, but some students go for persuasive pieces. Others, they go more like an academic reports, and a lot of students even use the format of a letter, and that's completely fine, unless if the question asks you otherwise. The second question is there evidence of the understanding and use of academic language for a formal audience and context? This is very, very important, especially for students who want to have a high grade, something like A- A or A+ in this assessment, in this exam question. The last three questions the examiners will be asking when evaluating your response are related to AP2. The first one is the material used from sources correctly referenced? Then, does the student use and integrate ideas from different texts into their writing? And lastly, is the information paraphrased and not copied? So this is what you need to do for this exam question. And as you can see, there are a lot of things that you have to do. And the evaluation of question 4 is very, very different to the evaluation of the questions 1, 2, and 3. Questions 1, 2, and 3, although are complex questions, compared to question 4, they are very, very simple, because this question is really, really complex and you have to show a lot of evidence in order to qualify for an A or an A plus in this question. Okay, so let me now give you an idea of the different levels of responses that I have personally seen students produce. Now, I've been teaching EAL and I often give my students past exam papers to do as homework assignments, or sometimes even I supervise those assignments in class. And these are the different levels of responses that we can have. So I tried to be cool, following all the trends online and all of that. So I made like a tier chart. I don't know what's the actual name for this thing, but usually, so from 0 being like the worst and 5 is the best. So plagiarism, that's 0. And yes, even in an examination, students can plagiarize. Now, you will not be copying things from Google or from an AI or anything of that sort, because when you take the EAL exam, A, it's taken under supervision, so there are invigilators in the examination room. B, the software, the SAFE examination browser, has very, very advanced and powerful tools that prevents you from opening anything except the exam at hand. So you won't be able to close it, you won't be able to switch to a different window. All of those attempts are just impossible. But you can still plagiarize. And some students, unfortunately, do plagiarize simply by copying the reading passages. So they have 3 reading texts and they just copy them, or they copy 1 paragraph from each text and use it to build what looks like an essay, even though it's not an essay. And such responses are given a 0 immediately, and such responses, they should be avoided. We go now to the second level of performance, and that is when students write an essay that is 100% based on students' own opinions and knowledge. So if there is absolutely no mention of the given texts. So if the topic, for example, is on social media, and someone goes and writes 500 words on their personal experiences with social media and what they know about social media, and they don't mention any information, they don't use, they don't reference any information, ideas, opinions from the given texts, that is also a very, very weak performance. Really, really weak. Because even though you can demonstrate evidence of communication, you can demonstrate evidence of vocabulary and grammar and all of that, and you may even have an A in communication. But there is 0 evidence of comprehension. If there is no mention of the texts, how can the examiners know that you actually read and understood the texts? And there is 0 evidence of analysis, and there is 0 evidence of application. So communication can be A, but because comprehension, analysis, application are 0, 0, 0, the average of these 4 will probably be a D minus. That will be something really low. So that's why the second level of performance is also a very, very weak one. So yeah, I forgot to switch slide as I was explaining, but this is basically why it's not enough to write a wonderful essay on the topic. We must use and reference information, ideas, and opinions from the given text, so I can show the examiner that I have read and I have understood the given texts. I was able to analyze the texts, and I also can reference, I can use in-text citations, different forms of in-text citations in my writing as well. So now we go to the second or the third tier of performance, and this is when students basically write a summary. So they can go with an introduction like the topic of, let's say, climate change or social media is a controversial topic. There are those who agree that blah blah blah, while others think that blah blah blah. In this essay, I will present both sides of the argument and then give my own opinion. And then they go, text 1, John says blah 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 blah, and write a summary of text 1. Sandra says, and then give a summary of what Sandra says. Kathy said, and then give a summary of what Kathy says. And then they finish with I believe, and they write down their personal opinion. Such a performance is still a very weak performance, because even though it does show evidence of communication and also evidence of comprehension, it fails to show any evidence of analysis. Hence why this is also a weak performance level. And when we go to the fourth tier of performance, this is again when we have those classic essay types of advantages and disadvantages. So this is basically when a student will go through all 4 texts, will have an introduction, then paragraph on advantages, paragraph on disadvantages, and then a conclusion where the students give their own opinion. So here, for example, we have the introduction, and then it says, when it comes to those who agree, John said, Melissa said, Michael said, Latifa said, and John said. On the other hand, those who disagree with the topic have a different opinion. Malik said, Robert said, Sarah said, and Taylor said. I personally believe that blah, 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 because blah, 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 blah. Now, this kind of writing may be acceptable in some forms of some essays or some exams, but in the SACE EAL exam, it is okay. It's not bad. It's not a fail, but it's not an A level either, because this is still quite weak. And let me tell you why. The problem with advantages and disadvantages essays is because they showcase or they provide really weak evidence of analysis, weak evidence of evaluation, and weak evidence of critical thinking. Because if you have someone like a child, or just as someone, let's say like a 17 or an 18-year-old who can tell you, oh, I can put the red balls in the red cup and the blue balls in the blue cup and the yellow balls in the yellow cup. That is technically accurate, but do we call that person a genius? Is that, so should they, like, I don't know, pilot an airplane, a 777, for example, or 747? No, because yeah, you were able to put the balls of the same color in the cup, that in the appropriate cup, but it doesn't mean that you can drive an airplane. This is why when a student, or when we have those classic essay types of advantage, disadvantage, or for, against, that, because again, what that shows is, okay, I read everything, I took all the advantages and I put them together, and I took all the disadvantages and I put them together. So basically, I took all the yellow balls, I put them together, with the red balls, I put them together, and then I add a third paragraph where I give you my own opinion. That is not, again, that's not a fail, but that's not top performance either, because this essay structure fails to provide solid evidence of analysis, evaluation, and critical thinking, and we need such evidence if we want to have a high performance in this exam. So now we start talking about the higher tiers of performance for this question, and basically is when we start analyzing common points of discussion. What are these things? So we develop a point of view based on critical analysis of how the texts argue the topic. Texts have different opinions, but they all discuss some common opinions, some common points. I discuss the most common points of discussion by comparing and contrasting the different opinions, information, and ideas presented by each author. I demonstrate my own stance by showing my disagreements with the points against my stance and demonstrating my agreements with the points for my stance. When we start discussing specific points, then we show the examiner that my critical thinking, my evaluation abilities, my analytical abilities are much stronger than if I simply take all the advantages, put them in one paragraph, all the disadvantages, put them in a second paragraph. So here is a sample of the outline or the structure of an essay that discusses common points of discussion. So we can have an introduction in which you introduce the topic, you say how the topic is controversial or how there are different views or different stances on the topic, followed by a thesis statement. So in this case, just for an example's sake, the thesis statement mentions two common discussion points, which are financial costs and environmental impact. Paragraph 1 is on financial costs, where your topic sentence explains what take you will have when it comes to the financial cost of this topic, and this will be followed by supporting sentences, and the supporting sentences is how each of the given texts discuss financial costs, and I incorporate what they say with what I think to develop a point of view. So again, I'm not simply saying, I'm not writing only what I think, I'm not only writing what they think, I am incorporating both at the same time. This is how you show strong, solid evidence of evaluation and analysis and comprehension at the same time. Paragraph 2, we follow the same layout and we conclude with a summary and confirmation of your point of view, where you show that your point of view is one that is based on evidence. Because again, in this question, you're not asked to have an opinion, you're asked to develop a point of view. And in the conclusion, that is where I solidify and confirm and reaffirm that my point of view isn't just something I feel, but it is something that is based on solid evidence. Now, the highest tier of performance for this question, I'm talking about samples that get A or A+. These are samples that showcase substantial evidence and consistent performance at the highest level. So, there is no specific outline or structure that if you follow, you're guaranteed to have an A+. Such a thing doesn't exist. However, the students who have or who showcase the highest level of performance, they provide a lot of evidence for it, and they consistently perform at the highest level. Here we have a sample of an answer to question 4 that is worthy of an A+. This sample would get an A+ in a real exam. Now, I will not read the whole sample to you. You can pause the screen and you can read it by yourself. But I will take a look at a few sections. So again, remember, we are evaluating C1, C2, CP1, AN1, AP1, and AP2. So if we start reading, humans of the modern era, blinded by their avaricious desire for conquest and grandeur, can commit reckless acts that are uncharacteristic for a species defined by wisdom and capabilities. Here we have 3 types of evidence. We have solid evidence of grammatical control and complexity because the student is using a compound complex sentence and writing that sentence accurately. We also have evidence of the use of sophisticated vocabulary. So we have words like reckless, blinded by, avaricious. We also have words like, reservation, for example, and we have words like preposterous nature. So these words are used accurately because not only they convey the meaning specifically, but they also showcase the student's own point of view. from looking at the vocabulary that the student has used, we can easily know what is the stance of the student regarding the topic. We also have evidence of, if we take a look here, let me switch to a different page. Yeah, this one. If we take a look at this paragraph, which is the first half of the second paragraph of that same essay, we again continue with evidence of really good vocabulary, so words like paramount, hazardous, corroborated, and so on. We also have excellent evidence of comprehension. So here we have Riley 2019 provided an estimation suggesting the length of the journey to Mars will be 6 to 8 months, and the student said that this is an estimation and it came from Riley, and he accurately, or the student or she accurately paraphrased what Riley said, and that is solid evidence of comprehension. We also have evidence of analysis. So here we have, for example, that Riley, he wrote an informative report. So the student was able to identify the text type of Riley's text. And we also have evidence of AP2 referencing, as you can see here, that two references are mentioned. So we have an indirect citation, we have an in-text citation, and the student again continues. So again, here is another in-text citation, another in-text citation, a last in-text citation. So this is what we mean by substantial evidence. That it's not because one sentence is amazing. No, every sentence is written at the highest level. Every word showcases high level of sophistication and accuracy. There is a variety of sentence types. So we've seen the student used compound complex sentences, and here again, the life-sustaining machinery are bound to fail eventually. This is a simple sentence. And the student is switching between compound sentences, complex compound, and simple sentences. And that switch is not happening randomly, but purposefully, because the student knows what type of ideas are better conveyed in a simple sentence and what type of ideas are better conveyed in more complicated sentence types. So, substantial evidence, consistent performance at the highest level, this is how we achieve an A or an A+ in this task. But one thing to keep in mind, and maybe you have noticed this earlier when if you paused the screen to read that A+ sample, is that an A or an A+ is not perfect, nor is it flawless. So yeah, can an A+ sample have maybe a few spelling mistakes? Of course. Or maybe one run-on sentence? Yeah, that is possible, because it's not meant to be absolutely perfect or flawless. No, it provides substantial evidence and consistent performance at the highest level. And any sample that showcases that will have an A or an A+ in this exam. So now, how can we maximize our performance and how can we get the highest grade? Now, you remember earlier we talked about the highest tier of performance, and I showed you this essay structure that you can follow, and I often recommend students to follow such a structure to talk about the common discussion points instead of grouping advantages in paragraph and disadvantages in another paragraph. So if you write an essay following this structure, what grade do you think you will have? Is it guaranteed an A? The answer is no. It can be an A, can be a B, can be a C, can be a D, and can also be an E. Because examiners will not give a grade simply because the student followed a specific structure. If you remember earlier, the evaluation process is quite complex. So what happens, your grade is decided based on the evidence you showcase in communication, comprehension, analysis, and application, like what we mentioned earlier. So who gets an A? Any student who demonstrates the ability to write clearly and consistently using a diverse and sophisticated vocabulary, demonstrate grammatical control and complexity consistently, thoroughly showcases, I made a mistake, demonstrates, I'll write it down, demonstrates, ability to demonstrate thorough comprehension and evaluation of the given texts, the ability to analyze the texts clearly and consistently, the ability to use a wide range of appropriate language features to produce a coherent text, and lastly, the ability to comprehensively select, use, and reference information from the texts. In other words, the A band of the Stage 2 EAL performance standards of C1, C2, CP1, AN1, and AP1 and AP2. Any student who demonstrates these abilities is the student who will get an A in this exam. Okay. So now, continuing with maximizing your performance, how to prepare for this exam. The thing is, when it comes to preparing for such an exam, this exam, to prepare for this exam, you have two questions that you need to answer first. The first question is your English level, your current English level. Because if your current English level is really, really, really weak, then trying to get an A or an A plus, let's say in a month or two, that will not be realistic. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. How to prepare for the exam? Well, it depends on your English level first, and it also depends on how much time do you have. Now, we don't want anyone to have less than a C, because as you know, in SACE, C- is the passing grade, and we hope that everyone can achieve their ATARs and everyone they can graduate and go to university. So the focus here is on an A band, a B band, and a C band. C performance. But at the same time, we have to be realistic as students and teachers as well. And if your English, let's say, if you are struggling and with reading and you know that you will not be able to read all texts in the given time in 85 minutes and spare enough time to write 500 words, if you know that you have these limitations and you only have, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks before the exam, I would say that it is counterproductive to try and adopt a very complicated writing structure and try to showcase evidence at the A band. But something more realistic, like showcasing evidence at the C band or a B band, in my opinion, is more rewarding, as you may end up actually getting a C or a B. Whereas if you try to perform at a level that is clearly above what you can produce currently, then you might just end up wasting too much time during the examination or causing yourself too much stress or too much pressure. So, what my advice, my personal advice is, A, don't study samples. So don't go looking for samples and see, okay, oh, this is an A plus sample, so I will do like this sample. No, that is the wrong thing to do. I don't think you will find a lot of samples online anyway, but in case you have access to previous samples, you don't study samples to prepare for an exam. What you should do is you have to study English. The best way to prepare for this exam is to improve your English level. Improve your English reading, your English writing, your English, your mastery, for example, of academic writing conventions such as in-text citations, referencing, and so on. If you do that, and hopefully you will do that, you are guaranteed to achieve a very high performance in this question. So now let's go and take a look at the advice that the SACE board gives, and you can access this document from the subject assessment advice. This is from the 2024 EAL subject assessment advice. So they say that the more successful responses, they commonly demonstrated a skillful use of language and grammatical control. They varied the complexity of their language and vocabulary. They had a clear structure and a logical development of the argument. They adhered to conventions, to the writing conventions, in terms of text types, kind of language used, and this eventually led to better analysis and comprehension. They also employed a deliberate and uniform referencing style, and they integrated a variety of in-text citation methods. The more successful responses, they also treated the texts with academic rigor. They properly used punctuation and capitalization, which means that after they finished writing, they went back to review and edit what they have written. They incorporated diverse perspectives. They synthesized information, and they maintained a consistent and appropriate tone throughout the extended response. And when it comes to the less successful responses, they commonly copied directly from the texts. They used informal expressions such as etc., pro, con, and did not adopt formal language. They demonstrated inconsistent referencing, personalized their arguments with phrases like I believe, I think, without adequately incorporating textual evidence. They lacked structure and had overly lengthy introductions. They used cliches and repetitive vocabulary. So cliches, for example, with the development of society, more and more people, blah, blah, blah. All in recent times, there has been a hot debate about blah, blah, blah. So these cliches are not, again, yeah, you can have a D, you can have a C minus, maybe even a C plus, but using cliches and repetitive vocabulary, that is not how you can achieve a high grade such as a B, B plus, A minus, or A plus in this question. They also had limited or superficial evidence, often from a single source. They overused direct quotations. They displayed inconsistent referencing, lacked paragraphing, showed ideas that lacked cohesion, and lastly, misinterpreted or inadequately analyzed the source texts. So just from looking at the subject assessment advice, you can easily know what you need to do and what you should not do. And in my opinion, this is the best way to prepare for the exam, is to look at the subject assessment advice. I cannot recommend this document enough. You can easily find it on the SACE website. It's publicly available. You don't need a login, you don't need an account or anything. And there is a subject assessment advice for every SACE subject. So not only for EAL, for mathematical methods, for geography, philosophy, they all have a subject assessment advice, and in it there is great advice, tips and hints on how to maximize your performance for not just the exams, but also school assessments 81 and 82. So my final advice is you do your best to start preparing for the final exam at the start of stage 2. If you wait until the last 3 or 4 weeks before the exam and only then you start preparing, I don't think that's the most effective way to prep for this exam, because again, this is not a knowledge exam. This is not something that you can just memorize and then you will do very well. For this exam, you must have very, very strong skills in reading, writing, analysis, evaluation, and so on. And such skills cannot be acquired or developed within a short time frame. Secondly, you have to take advantage of the resources on the SACE website. There are some past exams that you can access on the SACE website, and also the subject assessment advice. I hope this video wasn't too long. I didn't want to make a very long video, which is why I didn't include everything, and I did my best to sum up things and synthesize things to the best of my abilities. But I think it's now 55 or maybe 53 minutes long, so I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening. I wish you the best, and don't forget, if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment down below and I will respond to every question you ask. I may even make a new video on that question. Thank you, and I wish you the best.